The Scarlet Letter. Interpretation by Marcus McGuinness. The author, Nathaniel Hawthorne. Hawthorne was born on July 4th, 1804 in Salem, Massachusetts. Hawthorne's life was steeped in Puritan legacy. He is a dark romantic, American novelist, and short story writer. His work often focused on history, morality, and religion. According to the Columbia, according to the Columbia Encyclopedia, in order to earn a livelihood, Hawthorne served as a surveyor of the port at Salem from 1846 to 1849, where he began writing his masterpiece, The Scarlet Letter. A quick summary. The Scarlet Letter is set in 1642 and takes you through the lives of Hester Prynne, her daughter Pearl, Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale, and Roger Chillingsworth. The story starts with Hester being released from jail and heading to a hearing to determine if she is fit to keep her daughter after Pearl was born. She was found guilty of adultery as her husband, who was thought to be dead, came back to town. The people demand she reveals the man who is also guilty. She refuses, and the people want to take her child away. She then asks for help of Dimmesdale, who convinces them to allow her to keep the child. However, she was to wear a scarlet letter of the letter A on her bosom so that she may never forget and that everyone else is reminded of her sin. Her husband also appears, but under the guise of another name, Roger Chillingworth, and he is hell-bent on finding the man she was with. As the story progresses, it is revealed that Dimmesdale is Pearl's father. However, because he did not reveal himself, he is consumed with guilt, and it eats him alive. Chillingsworth is consumed with evil, so much so that his only goal is to torture and torment Dimmesdale. He finds nothing morally wrong with his actions. Hester and Pearl both, through good deeds and behavior, are welcomed back into the community. As the guilt eats Dimmesdale up, he and Hester make a plan to run away. He then confesses his sin to the people of the community and shortly dies after. As a result, Chillingworth dies as well, as the man he devoted his life to torturing had died and he had no longer had a reason to live. Hester and Pearl would soon run away. Now we will get into some symbols in the novel. The prison door. The novel begins with a throng of bearded men in sad-colored garments and gray, steeple-crowned hats intermixed with women, some wearing hoods and others bareheaded, was assembled in front of a wooden edifice, the door of which was heavily timbered with oak and studded with iron spikes. The prison door, like the jail itself, symbolizes punishment. The iron spikes reinforce the cruel harshness of the Puritan punishment. The prison also is the reader's introduction to Puritan society, and combines with the sad-colored garments to convey a sense of door and judgment and a judgmental community. The next symbol is the rose bush. The rose bush, also introduced in Chapter 1, primarily symbolizes Hester. It shows her beauty and her wildness, as well as her ability to survive in even the harshest circumstances. We see this in the description of the rose bush. But on one side of the portal, and rooted almost at the threshold, was a wild rose bush, covered in this month of June with its delicate gems. The rose bush, by a strange chance, had been kept alive in history, wrote Nathaniel Hawthorne. The next symbol is the color red. Red is very important throughout this novel. The color red is a very important symbol throughout the novel. Red is a vibrant color that brings attention. The letter on Hester's chest is red, meant to draw attention and to make sure she never forgot and none of the people in the community. Red is also the color of the letter on Dimmesdale's chest as well. However, his color red is from infection from his disease of the scarlet letter on his chest that he gave himself, which had been infected and not treated. The next symbol is the scaffold. The scaffold symbolizes guilt, public confession, and punishment for a crime or a sin. It appears at three places in the book. The narrator writes, in fact, this scaffold constituted a portion of a penal machine which now, for 2 or 3 generations past. This reference of the scaffold gives the reader who may not be aware of a scaffold an example of what it's used for, which creates the image for the reader. The second mention came in chapter 12, where it states, and thus, while standing on the scaffold in the vain show of expiation, Mr. Dimmesdale was overcome with a great horror of mind, as if the universe were gazing at a scarlet token on his naked breast, right over his heart. This quote shows how just standing on the scaffold made Dimmesdale want to tell his truth. Like Hester, the guilt is eating him. The scaffold makes its last appearance in chapter 23, when Dimmesdale makes his public confession, reading, I should have stood here with this woman, whose arm, more than the little strength wherewith I have crept hitherward, sustains me. At this dreadful moment, from grovelling down upon my face, lo thee, the scarlet letter, which Hester wears. The last reference is when Dimmesdale finally exposes himself to the community. This was Dimmesdale clearing his conscience, and he would soon die as he lived with guilt so long it killed him. The next symbols are sunlight versus shadow. Sunlight and shadow are two important symbols in the book as a whole. The shadow symbol is sometimes linked to the night. In chapter 8, for instance, Dimmesdale stands in the shadow in the governor's garden when the question of Pearl's custody is discussed, as he conceals his sin. Hester stands in the sunlight, having revealed her sin to the public. The book quotes, behind the governor and Mr. Wilson came 2 other guests. One, the Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale, whom the reader may remember as having taken a brief and reluctant part in the scene of Hester Prynne's disgrace. It also states how dreary looked the forest track that led backward to the settlement, where Hester Prynne must take up again the burden of her ignominy, and the minister the hollow mockery of his good name. So they lingered an instant longer. No golden light had been so precious, the gloom of the dark forest. Next symbols are character appearance. The physical appearance equals the inner life. Hester is beautiful and vibrant early in the book, when she is being defiant. As time passes, she dampens her spirit, becoming a little more accommodating, and in the process loses some of her beauty. Only in the scene with Dimmesdale in the forest at the end of the book is when she feels the promise of hope is she described as beautiful again. Dimmesdale's appearance deteriorates as the novel continues, as the guilt continues to help waste him away. Also, Chillingsworth is characterized as misshapen, crooked, and gnarled, representing his corrupt insides. Next symbol, the forest. It has a double meaning of a moral wilderness. However, for the Puritans, it was also a terrifying place. Hawthorne links Hester's shame and her exile to the terrifying forest. He writes, she had wandered without rule or guidance in a moral wilderness as vast, as intricate, and shadowy as the untamed forest. The Scarlet Letter. Ian Crofton wrote, the association of the color scarlet with moral laxity probably originates with the Scarlet Woman or Scarlet Whore of Revelation, where she is the woman seen by St. John in his vision. Also, it can be stated that toward the end of the novel, the A represented Hester as a whole. The Scarlet Letter identified her from all the rest. The last lines of the book describe the slate headstone, engraved with a shield, that the narrator described using the language of heraldry. It states, On a field, sable, the letter A, gules. The words sable and gules mean black and red when used to refer to a coat of arms, which Hester wore throughout the novel. Now we'll get into the themes of the novel. Sin and guilt. Chillingsworth's sin may be the greatest of all, as Dimmesdale tells Hester after she reveals the truth about Chillingsworth's identity. Dimmesdale says, "We are not, Hester, the worst sinners in the world. There was one worse than even the polluted priest. That old man's revenge has been blacker than my sin. He has violated, in cold blood, the sanctity of a human heart. Thou and I, Hester, never did so." Hawthorne suggests that Chillingsworth's sin is the worst of all because his actions were born of malice. Um, the most obvious example of the theme involves the affair between Hester Prynne and Arthur Dimmesdale. Hester commits the sin of adultery. Consensual sexual relations between a married person and someone other than his or her spouse is the definition. Because adultery was forbidden by the seventh commandment, the Puritans considered it punishable by death of both parties. On one level, Dimmesdale's sin of failing to admit that he is Pearl's father causes him immense guilt. On another level, his shame is reinforced by the irony of his situation. As he grows more tortured over his weakness and inability to admit the truth of his affair with Hester, he becomes more respected and revered by the townspeople for his apparent holiness. Revenge and evil. Chillingsworth's determination to identify Hester's lover and his malicious percent of Dimmesdale is an example. Hawthorne develops the theme in Chillingsworth's transformation into a sort of devil, and by Dimmesdale's realization that Chillingsworth's revenge is a sin worse than his own. At the end of the novel, Chillingsworth's death soon after Dimmesdale's shows the ultimate effect of revenge and retribution: an evil, wasted life, and a premature death. The last theme is enlightenment. Hester achieves enlightenment as she becomes increasingly loved and respected for her good deeds and dignity. As a result, the townspeople look for her for comfort and advice. Dimmesdale also achieves some enlightenment as he learns that he cannot live with the lie and finally publicly confesses his sin. Chillingsworth, however, does not. He never realizes that his torture of Dimmesdale is immoral and evil. Therefore, he dies soon after Dimmesdale dies as his life's work is completed. And here are my references for my presentation. Thank you all for listening. You all have a great one.